A push. This is Chapter 1, New World Beginnings, 33,000 BC to AD 1769. Let's get started. So here's a little intro to this whole video series. First of all, these videos follow the American pageant, 16th edition, so it should go section by section for the most part. And my goal within this video series is to cover the majority of the content in the book, because as you can see, we just can't cover all of it in class. It's impossible. Another goal I have, though, is contextualization. That's a big part of the AP rubrics for essay writing, and we'll talk about that more in a few slides. I do try to give you some key points for each chapter. I think that helps. And the first for Chapter 1 is that there were a lot of reasons for exploration of the New World. There was a high demand, at least, for cheaper products, primarily from Asia in Europe. And there was a search for new routes to the east because the Ottoman Empire, or the Ottomans, I should say, had a monopoly on the overland trade routes. There's also the 3 G's, something we'll say a few times this chapter: gold, glory, and gospel. And that would be explorers wanting gold and glory, and missionaries wanting to convert natives to Christianity. Some of the key points: that both sides of the Atlantic Ocean were forever changed as a result of the Columbian Exchange. And again, that's sort of the passing of goods and disease and ideas back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. This is key in understanding sort of how the College Board presents American history. And I just want to highlight this now, but I will again later. The idea is that everybody is impacted by this, and everybody's impacting everybody else. It's not sort of a one-way movement of ideas from Europe to the Americas. It's an exchange, and I think that's important enough to say about 10 more times this chapter. Also, each European group will have different goals for exploration, and as a result, they'll have different interactions with the native peoples. You'll see some interact more positively than others. Some groups, such as the English, don't really interact with the natives at all. Very little, I guess we should say. Now, you might be looking at this timeline and saying to yourself, really? Do I really need to know this? And the answer is probably not. You probably don't need to know this. But it's worth pointing out that this is sort of a nice way to look at the concept of contextualization. And again, that's sort of just putting things in perspective, putting a historical event in its proper place. You can think of this contextualization as the one sentence that a piece of history would get if all of history were contained in one book. And an example that I provided here for you, the Columbus reaching the New World. Well, what's the significance of that? Well, it's the beginning. It sort of sparks the movement west, or enhances it, or increases the movement west, which ultimately shaped both hemispheres permanently. And again, that's the Columbian Exchange I just referenced earlier. One last slide on this contextualization. Here is a portion of the A-Push DBQ rubric, which is a big part of your A-Push exam in May, just so you know. But you see, you earn 1 of your 7 potential points is based on your ability to put this topic or question or whatever you're responding to into the bigger picture. And it needs to be more than just a simple reference. You have to show that you really understand that. So hopefully these videos can help you to put things in perspective in that regard. Now on to the content of Chapter 1 finally. First of all, as you probably know, early people may have come to the Americas in crude boats, or more likely across the Bering Isthmus. And I'll show you a map of that in just a second here. But by the time that Columbus arrived, over 54 million people, it's estimated, may have been living in North and South America. The book actually does mention Pangea, so you probably know that from maybe 6th grade geography class, I don't know. But here's a map of the sort of Bering Sea and the land bridge that existed, which allowed people to travel from Asia across into North and eventually South America. We're going to spend more time in class looking at the different Native American culture groups, which are based largely on sort of where they lived and how they acquired their food. But generally speaking, there were your hunter-gatherers, people that were more nomadic, less sedentary, and then there are people who were more agricultural. And the primary crop is going to be corn. Maize cultivation will spark the transformation, which caused native peoples to settle down, and that will actually have a larger impact on things such as gender roles within each Native American community. The Aztec population in Mexico, for example, became incredibly dense, and we'll see Tenochtitlan here soon enough. But again, maize allowed for the population growth and the changing social roles we just referenced. The rest of North America, the North American population, was not nearly as dense, and that may have made it easier for the Europeans to actually colonize the continent. This method here, you can see in this diagram, is called the Three Sisters method, and apparently corn, beans, and squash all work very well together. If you do have a garden, you may know something about companion planting. These three crops just sort of work well together, and as you can see, there is a mound of dirt which the squash will help hold together. You have corn stalks which grow tall, and you have pole beans, green beans, and such, which actually will grow up the stalk of the corn. I tried this year, but unfortunately the rabbits keep eating my corn. So I've got the Two Sisters method of beans and squash, and they're doing all right. Now, Columbus was not the first person to discover the New World. Obviously, there were the Norsemen, the Vikings, around 1000, that founded or sort of landed in what is now Newfoundland. I think they call it Vineland. And there's also the Christian Crusaders, which had a big impact on the discovery of the New World. While they didn't actually come to the New World, they had acquired that taste for Asian goods, one of which was sugar, which was used for flavoring, but also for preservation of food. I guess it was a hot commodity, a luxury in Europe prior to the discovery of the New World. And the way to acquire those Asian goods was to use this overland route, and there were middlemen there who took high tolls in transporting the goods. They're brokering the deal, and so they are taking a profit as well. The idea was to find a more direct way there and cut out the middlemen. So it's the Portuguese in around 1450 that found a way to reach sub-Saharan Africa. They were sailing there, and they could do that with this new ship they developed called the caravel. It could sail more closely into the wind, which helped especially on the return sail. They promptly set up trading posts along the African beaches and began trading slaves and gold. And those slaves then were sent back to Spain and Portugal to work on sugar plantations there. Here's a model of the caravel. You can see one of the things that the College Board likes to talk about, for example, the technology's impact on historical development. So here's two pieces of technology, the caravel and the sextant, which both increased trade, particularly maritime trade. And here's a map of some of those early Portuguese trade voyages along the West African coast. As you probably know, Columbus was looking for a new route to Asia when he stumbled upon the Americas, which is where the misnomer Indians came from, right? You can see four of his routes down there below in that map. But again, more importantly, Columbus's arrival in the New World starts this Columbian exchange. And again, that's the exchange of goods and ideas and unfortunately disease as well, back and forth between the Old World and the New World. So roughly 60% of the crops cultivated around the world today originated in the Americas. And again, that's the Columbian exchange we're talking about. But there's more to it than that. This is a link to global commerce, which is globalization. This is something that the College Board really emphasizes sort of in the development of American history. So we should know this as a beginning or a starting point for them. About 50 years after the Spanish arrival in Hispaniola, the Taino natives had decreased from 1 million people to roughly 200 people due to European diseases, and it's estimated that in some places as much as 90% of the Indian population had died due to diseases, such as smallpox, as you can see here. Alright, so it was the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, which actually divided the Americas between Spain and Portugal, and therefore made Spain the dominant exploring and colonizing power in the New World. The Spanish conquerors came to the Americas in the service of God, as well as in search of gold and glory. And that's the three G's I referenced before. If you had to rank those in terms of importance, which do you think was numero uno? I'm going to go with gold. Due to the gold and silver deposits found in the New World, the European economy was transformed. In the textbook, it does say that this perhaps sparked the beginning of capitalism as a new economic system. And here's a map showing the Treaty of Tordesillas line. As you can see that Portugal did not make out so well in the New World, but they do have, obviously, Brazil. And so Portuguese, is still the language that's spoken in Brazil. Now the Caribbean islands served as an offshore base for the staging of Spanish invasion of the mainland Americas. And by the 1530s in Mexico and 1550s in Peru, the colorless colonial administrators have replaced the conquistadors. And I think what they mean by that is that they have sort of like less flair, less they're not known, if you want to think of it that way. Some of the conquistadors had married Indian women and had children with them, and so we have now a new mixed blood race, the mestizos. And again, that's not something that all European powers have done. And we'll talk about the English in the next chapter or two and how they did not really interact with Native Americans really at all. This mestizos, though, is a cultural and biological bridge between Latin America's European and Indian races. And here is a picture that you'll see in most every A-push PowerPoint of a happy mestizo family. Going back to 1519, Hernan Cortez set sail from Cuba with men and horses, and along the way he picked up two translators, which greatly helped him in his conquest of Mexico. The Spaniards had arrived at the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, and they were welcomed initially for a variety of reasons, but they had intended on stealing the gold and other riches and taking control of this capital, which they were amazed by. It was far larger than anything else in the New World, and it rivaled European cities. Here's an artist's rendition of Tenochtitlan, and perhaps you have seen some of the images of the stepped pyramids and have an idea of what that civilization was like. It was incredibly large. June 30th, 1520, the Aztecs had attacked the Spanish because by that time it became clear the Spaniards, they were really just lusting for the riches of the Aztecs. The Spanish encountered, though, and took over the capital and the rest of the Aztec Empire by August of 1521. And again, as you can see here, a similar trend. The Indian population in Mexico was decimated, and again, largely from Spanish misrule, but also from European diseases. Following this, the Spanish began to spread north. You can see here that they did build a fortress in St. Augustine, Florida, to protect the sea lanes of the Caribbean. This is the oldest city in the United States. In 1680, the natives had launched a rebellion known as Pope's Rebellion in what is now New Mexico. The natives there had burned down churches and killed priests, and it took the Spanish nearly a half a century to retake that region. The Spaniards used this encomienda system, and this is specifically referenced in the A-push curriculum, so we're going to talk about this some more. But it allowed the Spanish government to commend or give Indians and land to certain colonists in return for the promise that they would try to Christianize them. And in every sense of the way, this was really just slavery by another name. This man here, Bartolome de las Casas, actually spoke out against the encomienda system and did help to encourage Spaniards to replace this altogether, but it will be replaced with African slavery. So the mistreatment of the native peoples and the exploitation of their resources and riches did give rise to what is now called the Black Legend, and it's somewhat of a false concept that the conquerors were only there for their own good, and they were there to steal, and they infected the natives with smallpox and went about their business. And while that, of course, is somewhat true, they also did lay the foundation for the modern-day Spanish-speaking nations. They brought with them a lasting impact in the form of culture and laws and religion and language to these native peoples. And the Spanish themselves also incorporated indigenous culture with their own, rather than isolating and shunning the natives as other European powers, primarily the English, did. Remember, the Spanish intermarried with native peoples, bringing about a whole new race of people, the mestizos. Just to remind you of those key concepts, first of all, there were different reasons for exploration. Contact changed both sides of the Atlantic Ocean for good. Again, that's a Columbian exchange. That's a step towards globalization. We'll talk more about that in class. And also, each European power had different goals, and as a result, interacted with natives differently. We'll cover the other European powers starting in Chapter 2. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. You've got one chapter down. You've got 41 more to go. Welcome to A-push. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments, or feel free to just send me an email. Take care.